Now, it is my great honor to introduce Amsa Balakrishnan. So she's Associate Professor of Aeronautics and Astronautics at the MIT. She got a PhD from Stanford University, and she was formerly at NASA Ames Research Center. She's got several honors, and I would like to mention the AIAA Lawrence Perry Award, the CNA Awards for Operational Analysis, and the A²C² Donald Ekman Award. So please welcome Amsa. Thanks a lot.
It's a huge honor to be here, and I think this is, my 5th or 6th ACC, and it's always been one of the, most fun I've had. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that I've been doing, applying control and optimization techniques to air transportation systems. And so briefly, as a background of the system I work in and the kind of problems I work in, I think air transportation is something that has touched almost everybody here today. It drives global travel and commerce. Most of us flew in today. Just in terms of numbers, there's about 3 billion passenger enplanements a year. So these are people who get on board a plane to embark on a journey. In the US, it's about, about a third of this is in the US. There are about 27 million flights per year worldwide. And another remarkable statistic is that at any moment around the world, there's about 500,000 people who are on board a plane somewhere on the world waiting to start a trip. Right? Of course, with this remarkable size comes remarkable pain. So in the US, delays cost about $30 to $40 billion a year on the US economy. But there's also other impacts in terms of environmental impacts. So there's about delays alone waste about 740 million gallons of jet fuel and emit an additional 7.1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In a system that's already very strained and very congested, an additional issue is that we expect significant growth in the next couple of decades. And there are efforts that are being done to address this. And so there's modernization that's happening that I'm sure many of you are familiar with from the newspapers. So there's talk about next-generation air transportation systems. There are modernization efforts in the US. It's called NextGen. In Europe, it's called CESAR. But the idea here, again, is how do we increase the capacity by better leveraging technology? And part of this is going to be something that is very close to the heart of everybody here, namely the driver of this increase in capacity is going to be an increase in both autonomy and automation. So what do I mean by that? Autonomy because, well, the drones are coming, right? So we hear that again in the press. There's going to be a lot more unmanned aircraft in the airspace that we are used to flying in. And then a key driver is really going to be automation. So this is going to be decision support for the pilots, for the air traffic controllers, for the airline operators, and everybody else involved in this. And hopefully, at some point, for the passengers as well. So I'd like to sort of show what the system looks like typically on a typical day, on a given day. So this is a playback of radar tracks in the US, over the continental US. And so we started about 8 p.m. Eastern time. So we can still see each of these is an aircraft. They're not to scale. Right? And then as we get on to the overnight hours, there's still some traffic on the West Coast. And then we see the red-eye flights, as well as the UPS and DHL, the hubs, the FedEx hubs. And then as day breaks in the East Coast, you start to see this explosion of traffic. And you can pretty much see where, as day breaks in different parts of the country. Now, I'd point out that there are certainly places that are very, very congested, like, for example, the Northeast. The important airports, the large airports, the hubs like Chicago and, the Texas area are congested as well. And then we do see gaps here, and these gaps that we see are really military airspace. So they're specially used airspace, which is blocked off for military operations. Now, one of the concerns, of course, is as we have more and more unmanned systems, currently you can't block off a region of airspace in order to fly your unmanned systems. So the question really is, how do we integrate them with everything else that we have here? At the busiest in this system, we see about a little under 5,000 flights active and in the air at the busiest point of time in the US. So this is the system. Now, what are we trying to do algorithmically? Much of my work over the past few years has focused on trying to build what I call practical algorithms for air transportation. So what do I mean by this? Well, we know what our goals are for the system. So we want to build techniques. We want to build algorithms that help us achieve efficiency, robustness, and safety. So efficiency in terms of not having delays, not expending too much fuel, all of that comes into the efficiency. Robustness because, well, we all know that when there's weather and there are disruptions in one part of the system, they tend to affect everybody. So we'd like to be more robust and have the system perform better in the presence of these disturbances. And safety because we currently, at least in the US, have one of the safest transportation systems, and we would like to maintain and ensure the levels of safety that we have currently. What makes achieving these goals hard in practice are, well, several things, but mainly three things. The first is there is a lot of uncertainty. So everything from a weather forecast to how the system is going to perform on that day tends to be uncertain, and we need to develop algorithms that accommodate and account for this uncertainty. The second is the presence of human operators. So there are human operators, human pilots, human air traffic controllers, and all of these are important elements of the system, and so we need to find ways where we can actually integrate technology, automation with human operators. And the third part of it is that this is a system which is being driven by airlines who have their own competitive interests. And so the question is, it is important to understand how, the role that competition plays and the response of the airlines and the other stakeholders to the algorithms that we are proposing and that we are building. In terms of an approach, what we do in order to address these problems and developing these algorithms, and this will be a sort of running theme through my talk today, is we use real data. And as we're all familiar with, the past 10 years have seen this huge growth in the availability of operational data and sensors everywhere. So what we'd like to do is to leverage this real-world data, use this data to build simple models. It's a very complex system, admittedly, but it is important that we build simple models so that we can explain to stakeholders, so that we understand what the system is doing, and we build intuition on how the system responds. And then use these simple models to develop and implement scalable algorithms. So we're operating in a system right now where we have about 25,000 commercial flights a day. If you include general aviation or private pilots and military aviation, we're looking at about 100,000 flights a day, with maybe a few hundred unmanned aircraft flying around in the US right now. We're looking in the next few years, depending on the projections, at a world where we're going to have about 100,000 more unmanned aircraft, where we're going to have we need a much more scalable system. This in addition to the fact that the number of passenger operations are also expected to increase by about 1.5 times. So it's truly a challenge. And so by sort of embracing this, and what we'd like to do is to build practical algorithms and decision support, right? Decision support automation. And if we think about, we've been talking a lot about cyber-physical systems, but really this system, I would argue, encompasses the cyber side of things, the physical side of things, and the human side of things. So a lot of it is really how do we push for change, and how do we modernize, and how do we build algorithms that actually embrace all three of these. So with that in mind, today I'm going to talk about three different things. So three research vignettes, if you today. The first is I'm going to talk a little bit about control, and in particular some work that we've been doing on airport congestion control. The second part is going to be something about optimization, and in particular, because we're looking at scalable algorithms and large-scale algorithms, looking at large-scale stochastic optimization algorithms for a problem that I'll call air traffic flow management. We'll come back to that. And the third part is going to be on the how do we use data, so on the learning and prediction side, especially looking at how human beings make decision processes. So can we use operational data to learn models of human decision processes and then actually predict decisions so that we can build better optimization algorithms to run the system. So to begin with the airport congestion control problem, this is a problem that many of us might have, again, experienced. About 20% of delays at major US airports are due to high traffic volume. It's not weather. This is when the weather is perfectly fine everywhere, and you just have congestion because of high traffic volume. And the problem with this is, of course, that airport congestion increases your taxi times, your taxi delays, your fuel burn, and your emissions. So this is a playback of surface radar tracks at Logan Airport on a fairly typical summer evening. And the green aircraft are departures, the red aircraft are arrivals, and you can see this long conga line of aircraft that are waiting to take off here. And if you are an unlucky arrival like that one, which happened to take a wrong exit or a wrong turn and get into the departure queue, it can take you about 20 minutes to use the runway, to get your turn to use the runway and then get back to the gate. If this happens to you at Philadelphia, it's probably going to take you about 40 minutes to get back to the gate. So you certainly don't want to get to this point. Now, if you look at the data and what that says about periods like this, and this is data from JFK, but we see very similar empirical evidence from almost every major US airport. This plot is, it shows on the horizontal axis the number of active departures. So these are aircraft that have pushed back but have not taken off. They've left their gates, have their engines on, but haven't yet taken off from the gate. And on the vertical axis, we show the takeoff rate, which is the rate at which they're actually leaving the airport using the runways. So this is, again, like pretty much most capacitated queuing systems. Initially, as more aircraft push back, more aircraft reach the runway, more aircraft take off. But there is a point at which you hit the capacity of the airport. You cannot be taking off any further. And then beyond that, all you do is line up and wait. Now, at an airport like JFK, you can have 40, 50 aircraft that are waiting in queue when really your airport gets saturated around 27 aircraft. The record that I have heard was a day in 2008 when there were 84 aircraft in line for departure at JFK. So you know that the 84th aircraft is not going to actually get off the ground for another 2 hours. So at some point, you feel that you need to step in and do something about a system like this. In terms of the impact on the taxi times and system performance, if we look at times when this is New York JFK Airport is saturated, so when it's operating in this regime as opposed to somewhere here, even in good weather, the average taxi hour time is a little under an hour. In bad weather, your average taxi time is closer to 70 minutes. Now, the unimpeded time, the time that it should take an average aircraft to leave its gate, finish its checklist, and taxi if you had no congestion is about 16 to 20 minutes. So, and this has a clear impact in terms of delay and fuel burn. But if you think about how often this happens, well, in 2009, about a third of all departures at JFK actually took off when the airport was saturated. So they were operating in this regime as opposed to the unimpeded taxi time regime. So given this and given clear evidence of a problem like this, the question is, how do we deal with the problem? Or how do we solve this problem? And since the problem is one of congestion, we'd like to come up with a congestion control strategy. If we think of the process and how it works, well, what we know is aircraft push back from their gates, right? They start their engines, they taxi, and then they reach the runway, they wait for their turn to take off from the runway, and then they leave the airport. The runway is a capacitated queuing system, right? But there's interactions everywhere till then. What we'd like to do here is we want to build a congestion control algorithm that controls pushbacks in order to avoid excessive congestion. So you don't want to have a huge number of aircraft on the ground, the long line of 40, 50 aircraft waiting. But at the same time, you don't want to have 5, because if you have 5, what you're going to do is you're going to lose runway throughput. You're not going to keep pressure on your runway queue, and so you're going to lose throughput. So we have 2 objectives. We want to avoid excessive congestion, and we want to maintain runway utilization. The challenges in designing this, coming up with this congestion control algorithm, the first thing is, well, how do we design and implement a congestion control strategy in a system that looks like this? And the second part of it is really how do we design and implement a congestion control strategy that we can implement in the current air traffic control tower environment. So interfacing with air traffic controllers who are there right now and integrating it with current procedures and the way they do things right now. So to address the first step, what we do is we design a control strategy, and our strategy is going to basically look like this. It's going to be that we would like to recommend a pushback rate. We'd like to give the controllers who are responsible for releasing aircraft from the gate a recommended rate at which they should be releasing these aircraft. We're going to look at the state of the system, and the state in particular we're going to look at are two, namely the taxiway queue, so aircraft that are taxiing but haven't actually reached the runway queue yet. And then the second state is going to be the runway queue itself. So how many aircraft are already at the runway and are waiting for their turn to take off? Now, in designing this control strategy, we've got to be careful about a couple of things. The first is that the runway process is one that's very dynamic. It changes over time, and it's very stochastic. Throughput, so the rate at which aircraft leave the runway, take off from the runway, can depend on a whole bunch of factors, including the fleet mix. So do you have heavy aircraft? Where are they going to? Is it an aircraft that's going to Europe, or is it an aircraft that's going to New York, and all of that? The weather conditions there at that time. And because your airport is not just doing departures but also having arrivals coming in, it depends on the arrival demand. It depends on the availability of your routes in your airspace. It depends on which controller is there, right? So is it a controller who has much experience and has seen this, or is it a controller who's just come off training and is seeing this for the first time? Now, in addition to trying to model that runway process, we also have another source of randomness. And this is that if we think about what we're trying to control, we're trying to maintain pressure on the runway and at the same time keep runway throughput up and not have a very long queue. So we're trying to control the runway, but our point of actuation is at the gate, which is on average maybe 15 minutes away, but it is a random process. So some aircraft are going to take longer to taxi and some aircraft are going to take shorter to taxi, and we need to account for that as well. So what we do is, well, given this, we go back to our toolbox and we say, well, that's okay. If I can model these uncertainties and I can use data to model these uncertainties, I can then formulate this problem, our optimal control problem, as an infinite horizon average cost problem and solve it using dynamic programming. So what are we going to do? Well, every 15 minutes or so, we're going to take this, the airport, look at the state of the airport in terms of how many aircraft are still taxiing and how many are actually at the runway. And we're going to predict the departure throughput in the next time period, the next 15 minutes. To do this, we look at the data and we say, well, the runway service times are typically Erlang, but we can learn these the parameters of this Erlang distribution from actual data conditioned on different values of arrival demand and weather and so on. And then we can write out the Chapman-Kolmogorov equations for the evolution of the state of the airport, the surface itself. And this gives us a prediction on what's going to be happening over the next 15 minutes. We also need a cost function, and so we use a fairly simple cost function. The cost function is going to depend on the number of aircraft that are in the departure queue. We're going to give a really high penalty for starving the runway, because if you starve the runway, first you're losing throughput, right? You have a zero size of your runway queue, but you also lose confidence, right? The controllers are not going to trust you very much, the automation very much every time you stop the runway. And at the same time, we do know that if the runway queue gets very large, there's a queuing cost, so there's a cost of queuing, which is typically quadratic that we put in there. So using this, we can then write out the Bellman equation, which is going to give us the optimal recommended rate at which aircraft should be released. We solve this as an infinite horizon average cost problem, as I said before, but you can always also formulate it as a minimum average cost per stage problem, and we can talk about all kinds of trade-offs with what the discount factor should be and so on. And this also allows us to put in the other source of randomness, namely some aircraft are taxiing slower and some aircraft are taxiing faster, so you can, again, learn the likelihood of that from the data and put that in and then solve this. And policy iteration actually works remarkably well. In about 10 iterations, you converge and you can find an optimal pushback rate. So what does that look like? Well, if you look at Boston Airport in a particular runway configuration, so this is weird notation, and what it means is that aircraft are landing on 22L and 27, so that's the runways on which aircraft are landing, and aircraft are taking off on 22R, which is this one, and a few of them are taking off on 22L. But we can say that when it's in these conditions, under this weather condition, so this is in good weather, your optimal pushback rate should be, taking into account all the uncertainty there is you look at the size of your departure queue at any time, and you look at the number of aircraft traveling to the runway, and if you have about 23 aircraft or so at Boston, you're going to be good for the next 15 minutes. So you probably want to stop pushbacks for the next 15 minutes. But as this changes, you have a different optimal rate. So depending on the state, you have an optimal rate. And this actually makes a little bit of sense that this flattens out and it's not just a pure straight line, because if you think about it, if you consider this point where you have 5 aircraft that are taxiing to the runway, but there's nobody at the runway itself, you probably need to be getting a little more, you need to be pushing them faster, right? So that's why there's a dip there. Now, once we have this optimal rate, which we obtain by solving the problem, question is how do we now communicate this to human air traffic controllers and have them implement it? So the way the first rule of any tower experiment in the US is, or anywhere else, is thou shalt not talk to the controllers when they're on shift, right? Because it's very distracting to have a bunch of researchers talking to the controllers. So what we do is we went into Boston Logan Airport and we said, we're going to not talk to you. We're going to use these rates to come up with these color-coded, here's the rate at which you should be releasing aircraft over the next 15 minutes. The first year, we used these color-coded 5 by 5 inch by 7 inch cards. So you can see the card placed here at the position of this controller who was responsible for releasing aircraft. The next year, we went to much more expensive cards. So we moved to an Android tablet where at the back of the tower, there's either one of the researchers, or we actually experimented with some of the tower personnel putting in the inputs that you need, namely the state of the system, and it outputs the recommended rate, and then that gets transmitted to the controller who's here in terms of the recommended rate, says in the next 15 minutes, you really should be metering your aircraft out so that you're not releasing more than 5 aircraft every 15 minutes. We can play around with display mode, so it gave us a good opportunity to actually look at some of the human factors issue on how do you design automation and how do you communicate rates, strategies like this, control strategies like this to the controllers. What was even more promising for us and reassuring was that when we look at the data, when we're actually testing this, it actually works. So this is data from the field test that we conducted. This is one day, and this is the 21st of July in 2011. So the top plot basically shows 3 things. It shows in orange the demand. So this is the number of aircraft or pilots that actually called in saying they want to push back in that time period. The green shows the number of aircraft that were actually cleared by the controllers for release, right? So the controllers are doing 3 every 5 minutes or 2 every 3 minutes. So they're holding some of these aircraft back at the gate and saying, don't start your engines yet. And the blue line is showing the level of traffic that we're keeping on the ground. So the first thing we see is that as the traffic builds up, you start having the orange lines being greater than the green lines because some of these aircraft are being held at their gates because there's too much congestion on the ground and you're better off staying at the gate for a few more minutes. The second shows our predictability in terms of throughput in that the statistical models that we're building using historical data typically predicts the throughput in a 15-minute interval to within plus or minus 2 typically, which is also within the parameters of the uncertainty that we're assuming in coming up with our optimal control strategy. And the bottom plot shows the benefits of doing this. So for every 15-minute interval, the vertical green lines are showing the average taxi time of aircraft that push back in that time period. And the red shows on the negative side how long, on average, were these aircraft actually held back at the gate. And what we see is initially, as congestion builds up, you have your taxi times going up as well. But there's a point at which you decide, well, the metering says, no, we should be metering now. And so you trade off your time spent in active taxi for time spent at the gate with engines off. But at the same time, you maintain throughput. And so what you can show is that you don't cause any additional delay. So all you're doing is transferring delay, which is spent with engines on, to delay, which is spent with engines off. And if we play back again the operations, on that day, so, and you compare this to the long line of aircraft that we saw in the first movie that I showed on a typical day in Boston, you see that you maintain pressure at the runways, so you want no problems here, right? You don't want excessive workload. You want to keep about 4 or 5 aircraft that are always ready for takeoff because that's within the variation of the throughput that you see. But at the same time, at these times, we're holding about 20, 30 aircraft back at their gates. And we can do so without starving the runway and maintaining performance. Now, an even more significant factor was in 2010 when there was also construction going on at the airport. So in this white region, aircraft couldn't go. And so what aircraft would do is go out here, cross, and then come out here and take off. And here what you see is we haven't started metering yet. And just about now, we're going to start metering. And you see that there's going to be pressure here, there's going to be a little bit of a queue here, but you don't have a long line. So the moment you start metering and the control policy kicks in, you no longer have 20, 30 aircraft that are waiting in line for departure. You have about 4 or 5 that are there, and everybody else is moving on. So overall, we've done about 2 years over the summer mostly. Boston has very sporadic instances of congestion, but we were targeting the 4 to 8 p.m. period on about 15 days at Logan Airport. And what we found was, on average, you hold an aircraft back about less than 5 minutes. But the significant benefit to be had in that when you hold an aircraft back for less than 5 minutes, the gain in savings in fuel burn that that aircraft gets is about a little more than 50 kilograms of fuel, which it really adds up very quickly. And so we showed that during these 15 time periods, which were chosen quite when there was congestion and they were chosen randomly, you end up having almost 23 to 25 tons of fuel savings. And more importantly for the airlines, and this goes back to the competition and everything else, is we can show that there is a fair distribution of benefits, that not only is your likelihood of getting a gate hold proportional to how much your contribution to the traffic is, but that if you get a minute of gate hold, you're also going to get a minute of reduction in your taxi time, which is very beneficial. And so we've had very positive stakeholder feedback. This work is now part of the US modernization, so the next-gen implementation, midterm implementation plan for 2019. And we're working on a follow-on effort at New York's LaGuardia Airport, hopefully this fall, sometime this year. So with that, on the control side, with that quick run-through on what we can do with good control algorithms for the real system, I'd like to now sort of take a step back more strategically for not looking at one airport, but looking at optimization and looking at the entire system. Now, the problem here, of course, is when you have congestion, when you have demand in excess of capacity at an airport, this causes delays which then propagate through the system. So this is a playback similar to the one that we saw earlier, except the aircraft are in gray. This is a day with weather only in the Chicago area. And yellow aircraft are aircraft that have more than 15 minutes delay, whereas red aircraft are aircraft that have more than an hour's delay. So on a day when there's weather only here, initially almost all the yellow aircraft are getting out of Chicago. But pretty soon we start seeing that you have delayed aircraft. In fact, you can have aircraft with 1-hour delays on the West Coast. And the reason for this is, of course, that no aircraft just flies one route and stops. There's a flight from Chicago to Seattle, which is delayed by half an hour. Which means that if that aircraft is going on between Seattle and LA, the Seattle-LA flight is probably going to get delayed again, and so on. And so this delays tend to propagate through the system. So the question is, can we actually optimize something that's this large, looking at the whole system? And here, capacities start playing a role. And the fundamental issue is that pretty much every element of the air traffic transportation system is capacitated. If we look at airport capacities, I mentioned earlier that the departure throughput depends on the arrival demand as well. So there's a trade-off, right? These envelopes, which are the trade-offs between the arrival and departure capacity that you get. So this is an example for Boston in good weather, where you can do this point is about 68 arrivals and 55 departures. Whereas if you come here, you can do, in bad weather, you're sort of constrained to only do about 38 arrivals and 50 departures or so. Right? So the trade-offs themselves depend on visibility, weather conditions, et cetera, which means your estimate of capacity is almost only as good as your estimate of the weather, which may not be very good. Now, on the airspace side, again, you have constraints, and this is a little more intangible. The airspace is divided into sectors, so these are regions of airspace that are managed by an air traffic controller, and they're subject to maximum occupancy limits. So you cannot have more than a certain number of aircraft in a region of airspace at a time. What that number is really depends on the geometry of the sector. It depends on the traffic patterns that you see. It depends on the air traffic controller workload and managing those traffic patterns. It depends on the weather. Are you having significant blockage or not? But these are, constraints that any optimization problem now has to accommodate and include. Now, the challenges with trying to optimize all your flight operations, when an aircraft takes off, what route it flies, and so on, the trajectory planning, in a system this big is twofold, apart from just the sheer size of it. The first is that there is a lot of connectivity. So when I showed the movie with the delay propagation, one of the things that happens is only 6% of flights in the domestic US operate just one flight a day. So almost every flight connects, and the median is between 4 and 6 flights, right? So the median aircraft flies between 4 and 6 flights a day, so there's repeated connections. So why is that a problem for the optimization? Well, apart from the fact that it actually results in delay propagation, it also means that I can't say, oh, I can't solve this whole day problem, so I'm going to make these rolling horizon decisions and then keep stepping forward in time. Because it might be optimal for me to delay my 8 a.m. flight by an hour, but if that 8 a.m. flight has 4 other flights, and that delay means that every one of those flights is going to also be delayed, the cost of delaying that flight or canceling that flight is clearly much higher than just delaying that flight alone. The second aspect is the uncertainty that I talked about, which is in this optimization, our capacity forecasts themselves are subject to uncertainty, so really we want to be solving a stochastic optimization problem here and not a deterministic optimization problem. So this problem of can we design trajectories subject to these constraints has been studied for quite a while. So Amedeo Odoni at MIT was the first person to mathematically formulate this problem called the traffic flow management problem in 1987. And the idea here in the deterministic case, and then there's been a lot of work over the past few years, past 30 years. The idea is that the question is this. So we have a given set of flights that we'd like to operate. We know the aircraft that the airlines have assigned to those flights. We have capacity profiles. So we know the capacity as a function of time at all these airports and all these sectors. It is possible that if it's uncertain, we really have a probabilistic capacity forecast, and we'll come back to that. So I call that a scenario tree. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to optimize the system in order to maximize some expected system-wide profit, right, benefit. But at the same time, we want to satisfy all the operational and capacity constraints that the real system has. And in the case of uncertain forecasts, you want to say that no matter what scenario, no matter what realization of uncertainty I have, I'm not going to violate these constraints because I cannot exceed the workload constraint that I have under any situation. The constraints that we care about are sort of 3 sets of constraints. The first one I talked about earlier, they're the airspace and airport sector capacity limits that you can't exceed. The second is that of flight connectivity. So aircraft are going to connect and have to wait a minimum turnaround time for passengers to get out and new passengers to get in, and then all the cleaning and everything else to get done. So this connectivity has to be considered in the optimization. And the third thing is, well, you can't fly at the speed of light, right? So you have a sort of minimum transit time in any area. You also have a maximum transit time because you don't want to delay things indefinitely. Now, in terms of control actions, well, we have primarily 3 sets of control actions that we can take. We can delay aircraft, right? You can delay them on the ground. It's cheaper. You can delay them in the air. It's more expensive. You can reroute flights, right? So you have a large weather event in the middle of the country. You can say, I'm going to have everybody moving south, everybody moving north, and so on. Or, small reroutes around weather. And at the worst case, you can cancel flights because there is no way we're going to meet these the constraints we have using, with the demand that we have, right? Now, in order to do this, we have to first define, so I'm going to try to come up with a way to solve for the trajectory. So the question becomes, well, what is a trajectory? We're going to consider a case where we're discretizing time, and in much of this, I'm going to use 5-minute discretizations of time. Typical thing in these problems is between 5 and 15 minutes. We can, there are all kinds of trade-offs on do you pick 5 or do you pick 15. And what a trajectory is really going to be in this large, massive network. It's going to be a sequence of node-time combinations. So what do I mean by that? It's going to be something that looks like, well, this flight is going to leave at this gate. It's going to either taxi immediately to the runway taking some time, or it's going to be put on hold because of the reasons that I talked about earlier in the congestion control part. It's then going to get to the runway. It's then going to get to a departure fix, and then there are nodes in these sectors. Within each of these sectors, it has to satisfy the sector capacity constraints, and then taking off at this runway, it has to satisfy the airport capacity constraints, and then it's going to get to this node at this time. It's then going to fly this route and get to this node at this time, and then get to this node at this time, and then land at this airport. And if it goes on, you're going to say, well, you get to your gate, you're going to wait there so much time, and then you're going to have to go on your next flight and so on, right? So that's our trajectory. Now, when we have the uncertain case, we actually have to deal with trajectory trees. What do we mean by this? So now we have the typical way in which uncertainty is thought about in the air transportation field is one of scenario trees, where I have a probabilistic forecast which says, well, I think this is what my capacities are going to be in the, between 9 and 9:30. At 9:30, I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's going to be one of two things. With 40% probability, I'm going to have this. With 60% probability, something else is going to happen, and then so on, right? So it keeps, you have this tree of possible scenarios that you can have. So really, when you think about the stochastic optimization problem, your decision is going to be, well, you depart the gate at this time, you reach the runway at 9:15, you get to the departure fix, and then if one scenario happens, you do this. If another scenario happens, you do something else. But of course, the important thing here is going to be that you can only make decisions based on information that you have at that time. So I cannot say that at 9:15 or at 9:30, you make a decision based on whether S3 is going to happen or S4 is going to happen, right? I can't say go left if S3 or right if S4 at 9:30, because at 9:30, I don't yet know which of those two is going to happen. I'm likely to only find out that information an hour and 15 minutes later. So the idea is that the optimization has to contain this as well. So I'm just going to briefly sketch through how we tackle these problems and talk about some of the results. I'm going to focus mainly on the deterministic problem because it's hard enough. And the deterministic problem is formulated as an optimization problem. I'm not going to read through the math. So basically what it's doing is it's saying maximize your total benefit of all the trajectories that you're going to select, right? Subject to, you can only select one trajectory for each aircraft. So you have to tell the aircraft what trajectory it has to fly. You have to satisfy all these sector capacity constraints that you have. You have to satisfy the airport capacity envelope constraints that you have, right? And finally, it's a binary integer program, the way we formulated it. So we have a binary variable that says, hey, this is the trajectory that you're going to pick, right? So we have what is essentially a very large-scale integer program. So what do I mean by very large scale? So the equivalent formulations of problems like this have hundreds of thousands of constraints and hundreds of thousands of decision variables. The way we formulated it in terms of the trajectories, we still have about 130,000 constraints and about 20,000 decision variables, and it's not very sparse, right? What we're going to do is we propose an LP relaxation. So we're going to decompose this and solve this using column generation, which for, I think, most controls people is also called dual decomposition, right? So this is it's just terminology. And the idea here is going to be in our relaxation that we're going to decompose it so that we solve these sub-problems for every one of these trajectories, every aircraft separately. So if we go back here, I have one indicating the selected trajectory for that particular aircraft. So what this means is I'm going to be able to essentially solve that, the sub-problems independently for each of the aircraft, which in the airline operations parlance is called a tail number because it's the physical number that's painted onto the tail of the aircraft, right, which tells you what the aircraft is. The other really nice thing about this problem is what we can show is that you don't have to actually use CPLEX or something to solve the subproblems. The subproblems themselves, the way we formulated it, can be solved as longest path problems on a directed acyclic graph, which we can do extremely efficiently using dynamic programming, and also it enables parallel implementation. And then we can come up with very effective heuristics to actually come up with bounds, assess optimality gap, and we can solve this problem to optimality, right, this massive problem. So just to sketch out all the words that I had here, what we're going to do is we start this process. We start with some initial trajectories that airlines would like. We start with the flight schedules. We start with capacity forecasts. We start with all the operational constraints we want. And we have a master node, which all it's going to do is it's going to check feasibility and generate prices, right? The duals are the prices. So it's going to generate prices for all the resources, all the sectors, and all the airport resources. These prices get sent to each of these tails, right? Each of these aircraft. For each aircraft, you solve a subproblem by solving the dynamic program, the longest path problem. In turn, what the subnode is going to do is it's going to return basically, well, can I do better? Can I actually get a better trajectory given these prices? And what is my valuation of that trajectory going to be? And then the master node, well, if you find new trajectories, you're going to then reiterate and regenerate prices, and then you're going to iterate on this till you converge, right? And you can show that you actually can solve this very efficiently. So in terms of computational experiments, well, we've tested this quite a bit. I'm just going to show you some results from using actual flight schedule data from the US Department of Transportation. This is taking the 10 busiest days in July 2013. We're looking at, somewhere between 17 and 18,000 flights a day. There are only about 4,200 distinct aircraft, right? So these 17,000 flights are being operated by 4,200 aircraft, so they're all connecting. There's about 370 airports here, 375 airspace sectors. If you think about OD pairs in this network, we have about 3,700 OD pairs. We take all the capacities from actual FAA data. We say, well, airlines typically start canceling if there's more than a 4-hour delay. So what we'd like to do is to find feasible trajectories where we don't allow more than a 4-hour delay. So at the end of it, what we get is you can solve this to optimality. This day, for example, takes about 4.5 minutes, right, for the entire day. You can solve the trajectory, and this is showing the optimal solution. So the optimal solution says, well, these are the sectors. The red sectors or the red airports are going to be close to capacity. It's telling you which flights you're likely to delay. It's telling you, how much delay you're giving each of them. It's telling you that the yellow sectors are going to be close to capacity and so on. And you can find an optimal solution with only canceling about 2% of the flights, which is good, right? And the other thing I'll point out is you do actually reroute a fair number of those, because by picking opportunities and considering the full network, you actually gain. You can do better by allowing readouts. This has been very promising, and one of the things has been that, as I said, this is a problem that has been considered for almost 30 years. I'm not going to go through all of it. There's been a lot of prior work that's been done on this, and with different formulations. But what we have now is a way of basically solving problems which are about 100 times bigger, right? Because the full size of the problem, of the network that we're considering, the problems are about 100 times bigger than problems that we have seen before, and we can solve it in about 1/4 of the time. Right? We can do the same thing for the stochastic problem as well. Here, you can consider about 25 scenarios and run this, and you can solve. The stochastic problem is harder, but you're going to be doing it at a more strategic level, so it's going to be about a 15-minute runtime in doing this. So that's sort of telling us what the power of optimization can do. And one question that we get very often, and this is sort of a segue to the next part, is the problem with optimization when you're building decision support is the argument always is it is not the true objective function of the decision maker, right? You don't have the right objective function. You don't have, you're not taking into account all the considerations that I care about. And so for this reason, we've gone back to the machine learning point of view and said, can we actually learn models of human decision processes? In particular, can we learn utility functions? Can we learn objective functions, right? So this is almost reverse engineering of human decision processes. And the idea here is that if we can it's twofold. One is decisions certainly drive system capacity and therefore system performance, but if we can better understand what the objectives are and what the decision process is, we can actually build better optimization algorithms, right, for these things because the true objectives, and we can better, from the pure prediction point of view, we can better predict what is likely to happen. I can better predict the airport capacity a few hours from now if I understand how the controllers who are sitting there are going to decide on it. So what we've been doing is some work on learning maximum likelihood models of decision processes and utility functions. And the question really is, can we build models that best explain real-world observations, right? So it's almost like Jeopardy because we're saying, well, I know the answer. The question is, what is the question that was being answered, right? So what is the question? I know the answer. And an important thing here is it helps us identify the influence of unwritten factors. The air transportation system is very structured, right? So pilots learn to fly. Air traffic controllers are trained to manage traffic. But at the same time, you're given guidance on here's what you typically do. This is not quantitative guidance, so there's a lot of flexibility in how they actually interpret that and make those decisions. So what we'd like to do is to understand better what these unwritten factors are. So we've been dealing mainly with the problem of airport runway configuration to test this out. And so the question is, at any time at an airport, every 15 minutes or so, the controllers decide on how they're going to use the runways. So they have a certain number of runways. They're going to decide which runways they're going to be doing arrivals on and which runways they're going to be doing departures on. So typically it's denoted in terms of arrival runways, bar, vertical bar departure runways. And of course, what we know from just data and, it's well known that depending on how you pick your configuration, you're going to determine your capacity. A simple intuitive reason for this would be that, well, if I have 2 runways and I could be doing landings on 2 of them and departures on 1, right? So I'm going to be using one of the runways for both arrivals and departures. I'm probably going to have a higher landing arrival capacity than if I was using the 2 runways for departures and 1 for arrivals, right? So I can make those adjustments on the configuration in order to change my capacity. And there's a huge number of factors if you read the standard operating procedures that drive this, everything from wind speed and direction to visibility to demand because, again, capacity drives, configuration drives capacity. What is less understood is inertia. Because it's not that I can just switch from one configuration using a runway for arrivals to using it for departures in the next time period at the flip of a switch, right? I need to tell all the pilots who are lined up, and this is Philadelphia, where they're going to switch from a configuration where they're taking off in this direction to one where they're taking off in this direction. And it can take 40 minutes for them to coordinate this because you have to tell the pilots who are taking off that they're going to another runway. They've got to tell the arrivals that they have to get rerouted and so on. And then there are factors like there are noise abatement procedures. At certain times of day, you don't want to be flying over certain neighborhoods. There's inter-airport coordination in the New York area where LaGuardia can't say, I'm going to switch because you share the same airspace as JFK and Newark, so if you switch, all of us have to switch. So you can't just make that decision based on your considerations. And so this is something which is a decision that's the responsibility of a person who's sitting in the tower who has to do this. So what we're trying to say is, well, we know they have all these factors. Assuming that they are making rational decisions or consistently rational decisions where they have a utility function that's weighing all of these different factors, can we actually find the weights? Can we find, and we're going to assume it's a linear utility function, can we reverse engineer the utility function that best explains their strategy, right, their decision process? And then there's all kinds of assumptions that I'm not going to go into. So we use a framework called discrete choice modeling, which is very well known in transportation systems analysis. The idea is going to be that there's an unobserved error and a linear term in your utility function. Depending on what assumptions you make about the unobserved errors, you can end up getting different types of models. The most common one is what are called logit models, because these assume that your error terms, unobserved errors, are IID and Gumbel distributed. Now, they don't have to, Gumbel is to approximate a normal, but what happens is this becomes an extension of logistic regression, right? And then you can go further and say, well, my error terms are not all independent. I actually have correlations between some of them, and you can do this and so on. But then nice thing is that the maximum likelihood model estimation can be formulated as an optimization problem. The scary thing is it's a nonlinear optimization, so it actually is a fair amount of work to solve. It's not an easy optimization problem. But the good thing is at least we can formalize it. So once we do this, what we can do is we find running this is that it's remarkably effective. We can identify the statistically significant factors in configuration selection and also their weights. And some of the nice things we found are there are things that are anecdotally suspected but are not clearly known, which we can now formalize. We can say that the data says that this is what your, how much weight you're giving to that particular factor and coming up with this. And sort of an expected thing is that this inertia that you don't want to change ends up being a very statistically significant and very important factor in your decisions. And the nice thing from a prediction point of view is we find that there are good prediction accuracies even a few years ahead. So a few hours ahead. So we've tested this for a range of airports, and we find that if you want to know what's going to happen 15 minutes ahead, you can do it with almost 97, 98% probability, and it's about 80% if you're predicting 3 hours ahead using weather forecasts and scheduled demand. So it's not even looking at, I know the truth of what's going to happen in terms of the demand or weather. It's that I'm looking at a forecast and I'm going to predict, and you can do a remarkably good job doing this. So that's sort of a really quick tour through 3 of these problems. But I'd like to point out that this is pretty much, we're just scratching the surface when it comes to control and optimization challenges in these. I mentioned this earlier. I mean, autonomy is the biggest thing that's coming up in the next few years, in my opinion. So I have a picture, a screenshot from New York Times. Robot-piloted plane makes safe crossing off Atlantic. So when do we think this happened? Sorry? Yes, 1947, right? So the New York Times in 1947 said, well, we've crossed the Atlantic. What was remarkable for me was there were 14 crewmen and observers. There were 9 reporters who were on an unmanned aircraft flying across the Atlantic, which I think today, we could think about. It's a remarkably prescient article if you think about it, because the Air Force operators, they speculate that, this sort of robot plane, there's going to be wartime uses for this, but for peaceful purposes, it was suggested that they may be used as cargo carriers. So clearly, Amazon Prime was, 60 years too late. But the point I'd like to make is the challenge in autonomy is really not just, we've known how to fly a single aircraft and control it autonomously for about 60 years now. What we don't know is how you integrate it with aircraft that are being flown by humans, with systems with humans in them. How do you do it without blocking the entire region of airspace off? Right? So that is the true challenge, I think. Now, the second part of it is much more on the game theory side and the competition side, because when we're coming up with these optimization and control algorithms, we do need to be thinking about issues of fairness. And the system works primarily on a first-come, first-served basis now, but if you have multiple constrained resources and we're doing optimization over this, that's not going to do. We need to think long and hard about how we would ensure equity in allocation in these resource allocation problems. Related to that is, of course, incentives for the airlines or any other stakeholders to participate or report truthfully and how they respond to these systems. And really another challenge is if you have uncertainty thrown in, how do you even think about Pareto optimality? Should it be that you do better in expectation? Should it be that you do better in every possible scenario? And the concern here is really that depending on who you ask in the airline, you're going to get a different answer to that. And again, with increased information sharing, the question is going to be how do you ensure privacy in these systems as well. Security, certainly. If you're going to have much more autonomy and automation where things like conflict resolution are not being done by a controller who's sitting in the ground and looking at a radar track, but based on broadcasts of your position and information from the aircraft, you have to be concerned about how this information is used and issues of GPS spoofing and jamming as well. And then the last sort of big challenge, I would say, is one of interaction. Right? So these are interactions between humans and automation or humans and autonomous systems, interactions between what you do optimization-wise strategically and the tactical control algorithms that we develop, and even interaction between different infrastructures. Right? So when you talk about how the role that an airport plays in the power grid, or the role that the air transportation system plays, and the interaction between air transportation and rail or road access and so on, that becomes an important thing as well. So, so my basic message here is there are a lot of problems, very important problems here, but I do actually believe that we can build practical control and optimization algorithms for air traffic management systems in order to achieve all the goals that we set out to achieve. And really the key is going to be to leverage both the cyber-physical and the human elements, but using operational data can really get us there. To end with, I really have to acknowledge this. I get to come here and give the talk, but this is really work that I've done over the years with some wonderful students at MIT and also various collaborators. In particular, my first ACC in 2004, I was working with Claire Tomlin, then at Stanford, and since then it has been a great journey. So I look forward to many more years of working with all of you as well. Thank you.